My name's Nicolette Johnson, and today I want to talk to you about collages and how I went from not appreciating them and being frustrated to finding ways to make them work for me and my students. Um, so, first of all, what really frustrated me with collages is the fact that I could never find the color that I wanted. I have distinct memories of making collages both in elementary and middle school. In elementary school, I made a tree and I could find the browns that I wanted for the tree, but there was barely any green for the grass under the tree. So that always really frustrated me. And then middle school, I did another collage with a little penguin and a cute little winter hat and a scarf, but I didn't have the colors that I wanted for the scarf. So I just have all these memories of having collage be in my early art education, but being frustrated with it. So I'm an high school art teacher, but I feel a lot of what I'm going to talk about can apply K through 12, because these are just ways that I've solved that can apply to a lot of different kids. So first of all, for my introductory level collage, we only do black and white. We use ink, India ink in particular. I like the different gradients you can get with India ink just by adding water. It's also super affordable. A drawback is that it does stain clothing, so you have to be careful with students using it. I actually have my students use little mess mats. I have a bunch of these rolled maps that a history teacher was getting rid of, that were laminated and relatively sturdy. So when my students do messier projects, I pull these out, and as you can tell, they're well loved and well used. So when they're painting with India ink, I'll actually pull out these and have them paint their papers on these so that my tables and the kids themselves are able to stay a little cleaner. So that helps with that issue. But on top of that, for the particular what my students are using as a theme, around here, literally in our neighborhood, are historic houses that are 50, 60, 75, almost some of them. The building I'm in is 103 years old. So we have the Wilmington Historic Foundation that takes pictures of the houses, and they also have information on the houses. And so I'll pull that up for my students, and they'll get to see uh, who lived in the house originally, maybe who it was passed down to. A lot of times they'll have their profession and like any kind of like historical significance of the house. My students get to pick those houses. If they do want to draw their own house, they are given that option. I just would not make it a requirement for students to do their own houses because our students come from a lot of different living situations. So while one student may live in a 3-story house and have a pool, you may have another student that lives in a house that's more transitory. And so I try not to emphasize the concept of a home, try and emphasize more a house and the historical relevance of them. The reason we talk about why would we renovate and upkeep houses instead of just bulldozing and building new? The idea of reducing, reusing, recycling is also in things like home ownership. So these historical houses, instead of people tearing them down and building something brand new, they are upkept. And so that uses less natural materials, that uses a lot less energy. It's sometimes more affordable depending on the materials used and everything like that. But you get to talk about sustainability a little bit in that, and that the books that we use as our collage materials are the same way. Like, yes, this book is no longer serving its original purpose, but we're not just throwing it away, we're reusing it as art material. So the whole sustainability aspect both goes in with the materials and with the theme being historical houses. And again, I do have the occasional kid that wants to do their own house, and I tell them to send me the address or a photo and I'll print it off for them. I have the occasional kid that is just very happy and proud of their house. I had one student that thought their house looked like the Beetlejuice house, And so uh, they bargained with me and wanted to make the Beetlejuice house instead. And I go, okay, you can do that, but you need to take elements from your house and put it on the Beetlejuice house. We can't just have a straight up copy of the Beetlejuice house. You need to make the Beetlejuice house into your house. And so that's just another way of being flexible. I've actually had a walking field trip with my students before with an after school art club where we walked down and took some photographs of houses back in the day. They're just that close by and accessible to us. So I took about 30 different images of those houses and already printed them off for the students. And they get to choose from those 30 houses which house they want to do. So we have no two houses that are the same in the same class set. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we even talk about how to use the materials, I have already introduced my students to some collage artists through their warm-ups. A common warm-up I like to do is to compare and contrast two artists, and a few of those have used collage artists, so they've already seen collages, but they don't know about the materiality yet. And when I'm introducing this lesson, I show them a variety of different collage artists. I show more professional artists like Amanda White, but I also talk about Deborah Shapiro because she was an Ohio artist that began her collage artworks after she had jaw surgery in 2013. So that kind of shows that you don't have to be fully able to do collage. It's not just for people that have the time and resources to be able to make artworks. You can actually make them with the materials you do have. And they do like the theme of animals that she has a lot in her artwork, although I do encourage my students to kind of think outside the box, and they can do an animal collage if they want to, but for this particular assignment they're focusing on the historical houses here around Wilmington, because and the paper that they're putting the shades on are actually discard library books from my library. This is a current biography from 1984 that no teenager in their right mind would read through. So it makes a great book to use for altered book art, but also just the raw material of the book pages themselves. I usually go in and cut out the book pages so that the students don't have to worry about trying to neatly take the book pages out. But you might have students that are able to handle taking them out. The nice thing with older books that have served their purpose as a normal book and are now being turned into art materials, some of them will have these different shades going on. Like this is more of a typical white, and that's more of a yellow aged look, like a sepia tone. And then this is kind of in the middle. So if you're able to get a variety of books from your media specialist, you can have such a great variety. I recommend text heavy things like biographies. Like this is very text heavy, so it's very uniform. It has the occasional face in it. You can try things with images in it, but sometimes it's kind of distracting for the students. I'd rather they be the ones making the different textures. I actually have examples of that here. So when we're first making collage papers, I'm trying to get them to experiment with textures, with the way it dries. You could try some watercolor effects like sand, splattering if you're, again, in a place where the mess can be controlled. But you'd be surprised at the variety of textures, the variety of values you can get just out of India ink on book pages. With my students, we talk about foreground, middle ground, background. A student's natural inclination is to draw the main subject and then do the background afterwards, right? So with collage, it's almost backwards. You want to work on the background and then the middle ground and then the foreground for the sake of the foreground can overlap the background and you don't have to line it up as well. We also think about it in terms of top down. I have my students make their sky first, and then whatever as close to the sky we make, and then we kind of go top down. That helps with them thinking about these different layers. It's not the end of the world if they have to go back and put in some background. Say they missed a tree or something like that, that's okay. They can go do that. Just overall for collage, it is easier to work from background to foreground. We also talk about value and why it's important in a collage. Because these are dependent solely on value, they are really important because there's not color to make things more confusing. So they really have to think about where their values are. Are two grays sitting beside each other? Are they different enough or have different enough texture to tell the difference, or do they need to go back and work on it? So we talk about that as well. And smaller, bigger pieces, we talk about, yeah, you can fill up your entire sky with literally one book page, but is that effective for what you're trying to do? For some students, they have smaller pieces if they want it to kind of look more like clouds. But if you just wanted a clear sky or almost like a rain type pattern, yeah, a big piece makes sense. And then smaller pieces are going to make sense for smaller details and also things that are like in the background, of course. And then as you get closer to the edge, because that object is closer to you, it would probably be bigger. We talk about these different kind of spatial relationships going on. And then we talk about why houses are our subject matter for our collage. They're a combination of both organic and geometric shapes. So the kids aren't strict to rigid straight lines, and they're also not stuck only doing organic lines. They're a nice blend, in my opinion, of the two different shapes of geometric and organic for the kids to experiment with. For the black and white collages, I have students that can either make their own collage pages and I have them put their initial near the bottom, but I'll also have a box of prior years where we've done collage in the leftover pieces. Again, we're trying to recycle, reuse, reduce. So they can go through the different shades and look for the pieces they like. It's not that hard to kind of dig through the different values real quick. And if I have an early finisher, I'll say, hey, do you mind making me some extra papers for your classmates so that they can focus more on the gluing down, the collaging, than having to paint and wait for their papers to dry. And there's usually an early finisher that's more than happy to do that. If my upper level kids, they do get to use color, which makes things more complicated, but more fun usually. I have this little organization system that I made a few years ago. The kids can't put a piece that's smaller than a sticky note just for the sake of I don't want itty bitty little pieces going everywhere. They're more prone to winding up on the floor. Uh, During the actual collage project, I'll probably keep them in a little pile just for kids that can use them, but try not to hold on to them for too long. It just makes clutter. But I used an old copy paper box and divided it up to the different colors. And I'll have, again, an early finisher loves to go in and sort in the papers for this. And this usually stays relatively stocked because whenever we're doing any project that involves especially acrylic, because we don't want it going down our sinks, but really any kind of leftover paint that a student's finished with their project and has left over, I'll give them a book page and then I'll tell them to fill in the page with that color. So we get these kind of nice variety of different weird colors that kids wouldn't have made necessarily on their own, and the kids that come in the future can use these different shades. So now I have this interesting mulberry reddish color that a student, this paint isn't ending up down my sink. It can be a resource for a different kid, and it's just easy enough to sort it back in. Here's a 5-minute video that I show my actual students. I'll have a link in the description that shows just the straight up video, but you can kind of see how it walks you through the process of the actual making of the collage and the collage papers. How to make a recycled book collage. You will need 2 reference images, paintbrush, cup of water, ink, discarded book pages, scissors, and glue. Paint your pages. I recommend leaving space at your edges. It's much cleaner to have a border without paint. You can reapply ink for darker sheets after it dries a little. For my collage papers, I have a range of 9 different values. My particular image has that many values. Yours may have more darker values, so you'd want to make more papers over here. And if your composition was lighter, you'd want to make more papers over here. But it's always better to make more than you think you need because you can always lend it out to somebody else. But it's much more of a pain to have to stop when you're in the collage process and have to make more papers and go back and add them later. So I always recommend making more than you need. And I got this darker color, this darker value by adding more India ink, and then I just added more and more water to the India ink to get this lighter color. And my white is actually just plain book page. It doesn't have any color on it at all. If I really wanted, I could find a blank page, but I think the text still adds a nice texture to it, so I'm going to leave it like that. But you want to make sure you have all these painted, let them dry before you start using them as a collage material. Okay, when you do this kind of project, you want to do the background first, the middle ground, and then the foreground. And generally that translates to top down. So with this picture, I'm going to continue these trees on because they've been cut off and have more sky up here. I'll also continue the sidewalk off over here and over there as well. But I want to break this all down into pieces and the chunks of collage papers. So I've already actually drawn on here how it's going to be broken up. That's going to be my reference image that I'll get to look back on to see the details and see where everything goes. But this is the paper I'm actually going to be gluing my pieces onto, so I can draw on it all I want, and that's totally fine because it's going to get covered up by collage papers. So the first thing I want to find is my color for my background. That would be a really light gray, and it would fill up all the space here, and it's the furthest thing back. So if I had a football and I were to throw it, that was the first thing that it would hit. Then it would maybe hit the building, but it would take a really long time for it to hit the sky. So that will be considered my background. And then if I throw my football again, the closest thing, like I said, is the building. So I'll want to work on the building here, the little building over there, that bit, and then maybe do the shrubs on top of that. That's in the front. After I get done with the building, I'll want to come to number 3 and work on this grass a little bit because the grass is behind the tree. I know some of it peeks out a little bit, but I'd rather have the tree overlap than my grass overlap my tree. So I'll be filling in the grass bits over here, here, and in the middle, and then I can add my tree afterward. That's why it's number 4. And the tree will overlap on top of the sky, which I already have because it's number 1, and it'll overlap on number 3 and number 2. And then I'll finish my trees, and the very last thing I'll be putting in is the sidewalks, because I can put the grass down first, but I want these sidewalks to be the last things because of course the sidewalk would kind of go on top of grass. So that's how I'm going to handle all the different layers that I have going on. So what about our students that need some more differentiation? What about my students that maybe have dexterity issues, maybe have just difficulties with projects? What I will do for those students, just like my video showed, most kids are able to kind of chunk their house into shapes. But if a kid needs help with my help with that, I'm more than happy to help them with that. For my kids that need differentiation, I'll go ahead and either walk them through how to do this or do it with them. And then I'll stick this in photocopier, like I'll make a copy of it. That way they keep one of these, but then they make another one where they cut up the pieces like a jigsaw. So I have a number 6 here. I have a number 7. I have a much darker 3. So what the kid will do is that, again, if they're able to do it on their own, I'll have them cut up the pieces, but if they need help, I'll go ahead and help them, or have a student helper help them, where I'll go, okay, you need to find a shade for 3 and glue it directly on to that paper. And so that doesn't take any kind of real dexterity skill. They're just gluing it on. And again, if they have the dexterity skill, they can sit there and cut that out. And then it turns into a puzzle piece that perfectly fits onto where their piece goes. I was doing it earlier with the little sky bit here. I haven't fully cut it out yet, but when the student's finished, they'll be able to line up their sky and line it up like a puzzle. So that takes away a lot of the little trying to do the tight cuts on everything. And they can go back and do they can go back and do details afterwards. It's just helping them chunk the different values going on. And it's a lot easier to treat it kind of like giant puzzle pieces than trying to carefully lay everything out. Here are some of the different collage artists that I show my students to kind of help get their brains turning with this.
My students are already familiar with some collages. One of the early ones they look at is Guitar Magic by Romer Bearden. And we really talk about the energy that happens in this collage, how you have these figures going on, but it's really the energy from the overlapping elements in the bright red, vibrant color that really brings this to life. So we've already talked about this collage in a previous discussion about movement, but it is always fun to revisit. But for this project in particular, it's actually the block by Ramir Bearden that really ties into it. It's a tribute to Harlem, the neighborhood that he spent a big part of his life in. He was born in Charlotte, North Carolina, but he moved up to New York. And so he has all these little individual city blocks going on in this larger block. And you can really get the feeling of all the different things that are going on in the neighborhood and all these different layerings of different characters going on and their stories and how vibrant the block is all together. Um, and it's also just like a large artwork itself. A lot of his work was made to be really big, really monumentally big to kind of really draw you into his artwork. So that's a great one to introduce for this project. I also encourage you to look at other artists. One that I appreciate is Amanda White. She's a British artist that currently lives in the Canary Islands, but she loves England and she loves English writers. So her series about writers' houses is really inspirational for this kind of project because writers can be so kind of cloistered in their own little houses. And so the really kind of life she gives to these houses is really wonderful. And they each have their own little feeling going on. There's no two houses are the same. And it's not just the houses themselves. There's some where there's the actual gardens that she portrays. This one's actually a little bookmark, but you can see, or I think this one's a bookmark. There are some bookmarks mixed in with this. I don't think this one in particular is, but I found. Let me go find here real quick. I think Keats. So this is one gorgeous bookmark of the little house, and then Keats in the woods. And so even her formatting is interesting because it's in that long bookmark and not the traditional kind of portrait or landscape we're used to. But they all have their own little character, and they're just really fun to explore again with all those geometric and organic shapes going on. Highly encourage you to explore her website. And then finally, there is Junonia Arts. This was started by Shelley Hanmo. She was a pianist. She was born and raised in China. She currently lives in Indianapolis, and her artwork is just so playful. It'd be wonderful for younger students to see, but even I think our older students would appreciate how whimsical and how theatrical her collages are. All these different little elements going on, the little bugs and the little curls of the leaves. And there's just a lot of layering going on. There's a lot of interactions between different characters in the scenery. This little restaurant going on, the little girl trying to talk to the chef while the waiter's busy running around with dumplings, and there's somebody eating noodles on the other side. They're just really rich with all the different things they have going on. I believe she also does book illustrations as well. So her having all these different kind of narrations going on, and even within the same artwork, having all these different little elements. And there's a lot of cultural elements going on. Like this looks like for Chinese New Year's. I think a deer dressed up as a horse, potentially. I'm not quite sure. But there's a lot of fun things in here. And then, oh, here's some of the books that she's helped illustrate. And a little favorite of mine's near here, the bottom. A little, oop, not that one. This, oop, not that one either. This little carton right here is definitely one of my favorites because it's collage, but it's 3-dimensional. And I find it really fun.
This is one of these great projects to show that you can have multiple answers, multiple correct answers to the same problem. Like these two artworks are based on the same house, but they were handled differently. Everything from the way the sky was laid down, this one has more like chunky clouds, and these are kind of more overcast, to the way they treated the trees. This one is more kind of looming and dark, and the bottom ones are kind of more chunky. The top one has more simple windows. The bottom one has more detailed little itty bitty lines. The bushes are handled differently. There's, they're both correct. They're both great examples, and it's just a great way to show students that you can have multiple correct answers of how to have a project. I'll also say when students are turning their works in, I will take the paper and hold it up to the light, and that way you can see what's shining through. And I'll be like, "Oh, you missed this one window here," because the photos are black and white. It can be kind of hard to tell, but if you hold it up to the light, it's pretty easy to see what they have left to do. So I don't have particular requirements on exactly how detailed it is. I might offer encouragements, but I do have a requirement that it has to be 100% collage paper and none of the original photo reference they have underneath. If collage wasn't your thing before this video and it was something you avoided, like I used to, I hope it's given you some tips and tricks to help you try and look at it again. It's a great project to encourage sustainability. It's great to really focus on shapes and values. It's great because it's an affordable material. Discarded books and India ink is accessible to pretty much every student I have, along with glue sticks, that kind of thing. So it's something they could do even if just as a little side project. It doesn't have to be some grand thing. It's also very accessible because you can differentiate it even further um, with the little puzzle technique I talked about. It's a much older art form than we realize. It wasn't appreciated as much in the form of craft and the art controversy, but it's still valuable and it's still a great mode of creativity for our students. So if I can encourage you just to try a little bit more with collage, I think that would be fantastic. Thank you for watching.